Today's day and age, we like to talk in extremes. Everything is always the best thing ever, it's the worst thing ever, they're the GOAT or they're trash, and I'm here to tell you on this show, we do our very best to bring some nuance to the table. Sometimes the right answer, oftentimes the right answer, is usually somewhere in the middle. And that'll make some more sense when we talk a little bit more about that here later on in the show. Hey, welcome into the Hard Count. This is the People's College Football Show. It is college football and nothing but college football every single day of the year. If you're watching live on YouTube, we're glad to have you all a part of this community. Make sure you are subscribed. Quick note, we are also on podcast. This is a YouTube show first, but we're also on podcast. So go ahead and type in the Hard Count with J.D. Piquel, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. No judgment. Go ahead and subscribe there and leave us a 5-star review as well. We appreciate you for that. It is Tuesday, May 7th, 2024, the last one on the face of the planet, so we're so glad you're spending it with us. We got to talk about Deion Sanders a little bit later in the show because there is, like I said at the top of this thing, a very extreme opinion, both positive and negative about Deion Sanders. We have had people tell us that we are carrying water for Deion Sanders, and then we've had other people come out and tell us that they think we are Deion haters. Now, here's the deal, man. We are neither of those things, so we'll try and do our best to have a nuanced discussion about how we should talk about Deion Sanders. More on that in a little bit. The transfer portal, yes, the window's closed. Names are still coming off the board. Over this weekend, man, we had a buffet of big-time names make their college decision. Miami got a big commit. Oklahoma got a big commit. Oregon got a couple of big commits. We'll unpack those together. And then I put out a call to action on my Twitter page last night. I asked y'all, what is the college football take that is your proverbial hill that you are willing to die on as it pertains to the 2024 season? So your preseason take, if you will. And y'all answered in elite fashion. We got takes on Jalen Milroe. We got takes on Nebraska and what they're going to be heading to Ohio State. Also, Bijan Robinson indirectly contributed to this conversation with a take that he has about who the best team in college football is. We'll get to that. Speaking of the best teams in college football, I have been very, very demonstrative in how I feel about this 12-team playoff. Now, here's the deal, man. It's here, all right? So we're not fighting back against it. But even with that being the case, I think with the 12-team field now, as we sit here in April, there's a couple of teams that you can more or less pencil in as a playoff team. 25%, I think, of this bracket is actually what you can pencil in right now. So the college football playoff teams that I think you can have a pretty good confidence level of being in the dance when it comes time for us to have that playoff. We will give you those teams here in a matter of moments. But yeah, man, it's a beautiful day. We are glad to have you all a part of this thing. We are glad to have you all a part of this community that we call the Hard Count. It is a college football community. It is exclusively college football content. We appreciate the NBA and the playoffs they got going on. We appreciate the Drake and Kendrick beef they got going on right now. But we are not going to directly talk about those things because we believe that college football is the greatest sport in the world. We believe it doesn't stop. And so we are fortunate enough, fortunate is probably the wrong word to use, we are lucky enough to be able to do this for a full-time job, and we're grateful to have you all a part of this thing as we move forward towards the fall and towards the actually start playing some games. So we've wasted too much time already. Let's get right to it, man. The transfer portal had some big names come off the board over the course of the weekend. And let's just start with let's go in chronological order here as best we can. On Friday, Oklahoma got a massive, massive transfer portal recruiting win and landing Dominique Williams. Now, Dominique Williams played at TCU previously, was an honorable mention for Big 12 Lineman of the Year this past season. He's 6'2", 320 pounds. He has proven production with multiple years of eligibility left should he choose to take them. Oklahoma won his commitment over Texas. Now, this was the kind of player, in my opinion, if you're out there in Norman, this was a gotta-have-it kind of recruitment. Because Oklahoma, as they move into the SEC, it's a big boy line of scrimmage conference, and you got to have the big boys to get it done out there. And so Dominique Williams, as I mentioned, 320 pounds. That is a big human being. Oklahoma allowed 3.9 yards a carry in 2023. That's not horrible. That's like upper middle of the pack when it comes to the national picture. But in the SEC, it's going to take a little bit more than that in the trenches to get it done. Now, Oklahoma defensively, I think, has a lot of pieces behind Dominique Williams, and their job is only going to get easier by having him on the field. like Jaron Kanik and Danny Stutzman now will have a much better picture of which holes to fill because of the push that you get from a Dominique Williams. So all in all, massive, massive win for Brent Venables, showing his teeth on the recruiting trail, landing Dominique Williams, one of the top players in the transfer portal, one of the top defensive linemen in the transfer portal. So vibes are high in Norman, as they should be. Simeon Barrow Jr. was one of the other top players in the transfer portal, defensive lineman committed to Miami. He was previously at Michigan State. He's also a big dude, man. 6'3", 290 pounds. This, to me, has missing piece vibes for the folks out there in Coral Gables. We've made it pretty clear on this show. I think Miami's going to be really, really good. I think they're going to be phenomenal. But at the exact same time, I think Miami will be as good and will go as far as their line of scrimmage allows them to go. Because I think Cam Ward's going to be awesome. He's obviously going to be a massive ingredient to their success in 2024. But think about how Florida State ran the ACC last year. And if you're a Miami fan, you're pretty quick turning this show off because I just mentioned Florida State. Hang with me here. They were so good on the defensive line. Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, about to go make a whole lot of money in the NFL. Patrick Payton's going to be a problem again. But going back to Miami, they got to be able to have those dudes up front to be able to win the conference. That's pretty much the rule across every conference in college football, but for Miami especially, that's where I think they've gained the most ground since Mario Cristobal has gotten there. You pair him with Ruben Bain, Simeon Barrow Jr., that is, 6'3", 290 pounds. That's a massive ingredient for them as they move here into this 2024 season. Also just for depth. Just from a depth standpoint, like you got to have those big boys. You got to have a lot of those big boys to be able to make a run at what Miami expects to make a run at here in 2024, which is, of course, an ACC title and a college football playoff berth. Speaking of a college football playoff berth, man, Oregon, if you were to bet today, you actually have, I think it's minus 200 and something odds for them to be a college football playoff team. So if they like their chances as they sit here right now in the month of May, they right now have a top 5 portal class. And I would have to imagine a large part of that top 5 portal class has to do with the 2 commitments they got over the weekend in defensive lineman Derek Harmon from Michigan State and Peyton Woodyard from Alabama. Now, Derek Harmon, we'll start with him. He was a fascinating transfer portal recruitment because he jumped into the portal during that winter window, ended up withdrawing and going back to Michigan State for spring practice, and then jumped back in during the spring window. Now, Pete Nakos, follow him on Twitter if you haven't already. Been all over this recruitment, and he told us on this very show, hey, USC and Colorado got the visits during the spring, but do not count out Oregon and Ohio State because those were 2 schools that he had a lot of communication with during that winter period. So Oregon, they didn't have all the buzz during the spring, but that relationship that they created during the winter period obviously paid dividends here as they landed Derek Harmon. He's a Big Ten player, clearly coming from Michigan State, joining a team that is headed to the Big Ten, and not just Big Ten in the sense of, oh, he played in the conference. I mean, like, he is one of those kind of players at 6'5", 320 pounds that you have got to have to be able to be successful on the line of scrimmage. Because Oregon, they're going to have some pass rushers now. Jordan Birch, going to get after you. Mateo Uiagalelei, he's going to get after you. But to have someone in the middle, and to have someone of his size in the middle, help solidify that line of scrimmage, that was huge for Oregon to be able to land him. Similar to Simeon Barrow Jr., kind of a missing piece kind of feel to Oregon and what they want to do in 2024. Peyton Woodyard, I don't know that he falls into that short-term signee category because he actually did spring practice at Alabama, was awarded to be one of the most improved true freshmen at Alabama over his spring practice there. Transferred to Oregon. This was one that Steve Wiltfong and Pete Nakos were all over as well from the jump, but he was playing high school football last season. So he hit the portal, obviously, after Nick Saban and trying spring practice. So Nick Saban retires. He tries spring practice, wants to go and be closer to home. Peyton Woodyard was committed to Georgia out of high school at one point in time, flipped to Alabama. I mention that just because if Kirby Smart and Nick Saban both want you to join their football team, especially if Nick Saban's wanting you to join their football team since he coaches the defensive backs as closely as he does, that means you can ball a little bit. Peyton Woodyard was a 4-star player in the 2024 class. He gets back closer to home. Oregon gets a little bit more depth in that secondary. I expect Peyton Woodyard to compete for playing time early in Eugene. Massive get for the Ducks. Very, very talented player joining them out there in Eugene. Last player I want to talk about here in depth is D'Angelo Pons. He was the top player available in the transfer portal. He has committed to Indiana. Now he is following his head coach, Curt Cignetti. D'Angelo Pons was at James Madison last year and is now following Curt Cignetti, who was also at James Madison last year. This is a big recruiting win for Curt Cignetti. It's kind of a flag plant of sorts, in my opinion, being able to land a player that was from your team, that believes in you enough to follow you to your new destination in the Big Ten. D'Angelo Pons had a lot of schools he was hearing from. Now, which offers were committable, I'm not sure, but he heard from other Big Ten schools. He heard from other SEC schools. Like, he had some options, I have to believe. So going to Indiana shows the belief he has in his coach and belief he has in his abilities to go compete in that conference. He's 5'9". I believe he's right around 165 pounds. Really interested to see how they use him in that defense. I've said it before. I'd be curious to see how he would look in a nickel sort of position. Regardless, number one player in the portal, big get for Indiana. Now, a couple more players just to touch on here before we move on. Gavin Freeman, I think, was a really sneaky portal addition for Oklahoma State. Gavin Freeman is transferring from Oklahoma. A season ago, he played for the Sooners. I think he's a weapon in the return game. He's a prototypical slot guy, 5'8", 181 pounds. I think that was kind of a sneaky get. Speaking of Oklahoma, General Booty, he's on the move. Backup quarterback at Oklahoma, saw the writing on the wall, says I want to play. So he is hearing from schools like Samford, Louisiana Monroe, Iowa. It looked like maybe kicked the tires a little bit. We'll see what happens there, so keep tabs on him. Tyler Barron is one of the top players in the transfer portal right now that's available. He is an edge defender from, I guess you would say, Tennessee most recently, because he was playing ball at Tennessee last year, committed to Ole Miss during the winter window, transferred to Louisville during the spring window, and it looks like now is back on the market. He visited USC, also visited Miami, and it sounds like some other schools are also in the picture for his services. So Tyler Barron, we'll keep an eye on what happens to him, but he is a proven production kind of player from the SEC. Would do a lot, you have to believe, for USC and their effort as they move into the Big Ten. And Miami, they're just looking to add a lot more of those big human beings like Simeon Barrow Jr. to go with Ruben Bain. So we'll see what happens there. Also, Kwamani McLean, we'll talk about him a little bit. Not a lot of intel. He's keeping his recruitment pretty low profile. Right now, it sounds like there are 9 schools that have been in contact across the Big Ten, Big 12, and SEC combined. So he wants to make a decision in the next couple of weeks, but that's kind of the other notes when it comes to intel across the transfer portal. So again, make sure you're locked in here. We're talking portal more than anybody else, I have to believe. So if you care about the portal, you care about how your roster's going to look come fall, we got you covered. So we'll keep a good thing going here, man. Keeping a good thing going, man. Hey, glad to have you all a part of this, man. Things are kind of starting to happen here in the college football world. You had Lenoris Sellers, quarterback for South Carolina, be named the starter as of last night. Lenoris Sellers was an on-3 outlier for us. We were higher on him than anybody else in the country coming out of high school. He's a big dude now. He's a big human being. I believe he is kind of in that KJ Jefferson kind of Cam Newton mold, which is a lofty comparison to make. I don't know that he's as tall as them, but just the same kind of ability he has when he gets downhill and tucks it and runs. It's a tough time to tackle that guy. Excited to see what he is in Columbia this upcoming fall. Starting to see some quarterback one reveals across the country now. The portal is closed, so coaches aren't so worried about their guys jumping in the portal if they're not named the starter, but Lenoris Sellers has won that job over Robbie Ashford and over Dante Reno. So good for Lenoris Sellers, good for Shane Beamer, and we're excited to see what he does out here when it comes time for them to play some ball games. Last note on Lenoris Sellers, any player that wears rec specs while they play college football, you are on watch for us, no pun intended, for being an absolute dude. All right, so Lenoris Sellers named the starter in South Carolina. A little bit of news out of SEC country. So let's have this conversation now, and this is one that has kind of been a story of the last couple of weeks or so. Really, is just the conversation around Deion Sanders. And I've said many times, I said this yesterday on Twitter, and actually got some responses I wasn't anticipating getting when it came to talking about this subject and my take on this subject. I think you need to have some nuance when you talk about Deion Sanders. And I tweeted that out yesterday. And then when I tweeted that out, I was met with a little bit of opposition, people saying, what does there need to have nuance for? Why does there need to be nuance with Deion Sanders? You talk trash, you go 4-8, don't do it. Or they have an opinion on Deion Sanders needs to recruit the high school level differently. And I have a lot of opinions on that, but I think we're in an interesting spot right now when you talk about Deion Sanders. He is bigger than college football right now. Like, he has become a national mainstream topic. Why? Because he's Deion freaking Sanders. He is arguably the best athlete to ever live. Played Major League Baseball, played NFL football. I don't think it's an argument he is the best defensive back to ever live. And so right now, people are fascinated with Colorado, and they're fascinated with Coach Prime. And so I mentioned that just because anytime you become a national topic and you become larger than life, so to speak, folks sort of tend to just view you in a 2D perspective. Meaning right now we talk about Deion Sanders and it is either all good, you think he can do no wrong, you think he's going to win a national title out there in Boulder, you think anybody and everybody that has anything negative to say about Deion Sanders is just a hater and they want to see Coach Prime fail. That's one camp. You have another camp that thinks Deion Sanders is going to have a train wreck kind of operation this upcoming season at Colorado. They think the way that he's doing it is wrong. They think the way that he operates on Twitter is wrong. They think that the way that he adds talent and only uses the portal for the most part right now is wrong. And they think it's just going to be an absolute dumpster fire. I'm here to tell you, I don't really subscribe to either thought as of right now. And I think that's more than fine. I think it's okay for us to have a little bit of nuance. Now, why are we talking about Deion so much? Because I know we're going to get some of that in the live chat and some of that in the comment section. Say, you keep talking about Deion. Y'all, the reason we talk about Deion Sanders is the same reason I tell you we are the People's College Football Show. We supply what y'all demand. So if there was not a demand for us to talk about Deion Sanders, we wouldn't do it. Same reason we're not talking about Ivy League football. I love Ivy League football. I could talk about it all day long, but y'all wouldn't care at all. Y'all would turn the show off so fast. And so when it comes to talking about Deion, the supply and demand is there. So when it comes to the way that we talk about Deion Sanders, going back to my point here, I think we need to kind of break down this mental barrier for us that we can't say anything negative about Deion Sanders. Like, Deion Sanders is a college football head coach, and I understand that he has celebrity status. We still, on this show, being a college football show, have to talk about him as a college football head coach. We have to understand that, like, that is his job. He is paid to win ball games, and that was a big reason why when that Athletic article came out and that Athletic graphic came out where Xavier Smith is talking about how he wasn't, known by Deion Sanders. He felt like he destroyed kids' confidence. Again, the article, I think, read completely different than how that graphic made it seem. It wasn't a hit piece. I thought it was just, quite frankly, a report. It's okay for us to say, yeah, Deion Sanders is a head coach. He's supposed to win football games. Like, I have no problem with him cutting players. It's the business. If you're hiring someone to do a job and he does something to help him do that job better, he says, hey, this ingredients, this supplies I have right now is hindering me from getting done what you want me to get done, and acts accordingly, why are we dunking on Deion Sanders for that? I have no issue with that. But at the exact same time, if I tell you, hey, they went 4-8 last year, there are things to me that scream dysfunction about Colorado, whether it be Sean Lewis being demoted, felt kind of like a panicky thing, and then he goes and takes a head coaching job, felt like a bad move. Seeing all the things with the players that have transferred out, some of those I understand, they weren't real losses. I think Dylan Edwards was a real loss. It is what it is. I just think there has to be a little bit of allowance here for us to have a middling opinion on Deion Sanders. We don't have to think he's the greatest of all time as a college football coach because they went 4-8 last year. We also don't have to believe that it's just an absolute train wreck. Now, I've been very honest about this on this show. I have been critical of Deion Sanders and how he approaches the high school talent acquisition level. I really do. I think that the way they have approached adding high school talent, and most notably not doing in-home visits, is a massive mistake. And that's not because I think Deion Sanders isn't a great recruiter. In fact, the opposite. I think if he were to go in-home, it would change the game for Colorado recruiting. It would change the game for how they acquire high school talent. And I understand he wants to go through the portal, and guys that are going through the portal don't really have a ton of interest in the home visit stuff or what have you. Like, I hear all those excuses and explanations, but again, we can have an opinion and say Deion Sanders should do in-home visits. Doesn't mean I'm a hater. Doesn't mean Deion Sanders isn't still going to be a good coach long-term at Colorado, but these are things that college football coaches have done and had success doing. I think it's fair for us to say, hey, Deion, maybe this would be a good move for you to do. So that's neither here nor there. But this is the thing that I think needs to be addressed too. People seem to have a hard time separating Deion Sanders and how he operates as a person and how he operates as a coach. Like, when he goes on Twitter and is trash-talking not former players, but players that are offending former players, and the way that he's tweeting about his son being a top 5 pick to a guy with a Tank Dell profile picture and 271 followers. Like, yeah, I don't like that. I'm not a fan of that. I don't want my college football head coach doing that. But at the exact same time, it doesn't mean he's not going to be a good coach. Like, talking trash and the way that you operate on Twitter, I don't think it necessarily correlates exactly to what you're going to do on Saturdays in the fall. Now, I understand it rubbed people the wrong way because it's like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be talking trash after a 4-8 season. Maybe we shouldn't say we got time when we're talking about how we don't have enough time to go do in-home visits. I see that thought process too. But the way that Deion operates is the way that Deion operates. And the way that Deion has beat to his own drum since the beginning of time is why he has had the career he's had. It's why he was able to go play Major League Baseball and be in the NFL at the exact same time. Like, the way that he does things is specific to Deion, and it's why he's had the success that he's had. So, at the end of the day here, what I'm trying to say is it's okay for us to not have a totally absolute opinion on Deion Sanders. Are there some things that I truthfully would like to see him do differently? Yes, I've been vocal about those. High school recruiting, the way he operates on Twitter, all those things. I'd like to see it happen in a different way. But also, it's impossible to ignore the positives. Had a 3-win improvement when he showed up. They were 1-11. He made them 4-8. 4-8's not phenomenal, but 4-8 also taking 3 more wins, you would take that in a heartbeat. If you're any other team in the country, you take a 3-win improvement, regardless of what you were the year before. So, bottom line here, it's okay to not be absolute in our opinion on Deion Sanders. Doesn't have to be all bad, doesn't have to be all good. It can be somewhere in the middle. I like a lot of what he's done. There's a lot that I would like to see him do differently and stuff that I, quite frankly, just don't think he should do. At the end of the day, Deion's going to be Deion, and here's my favorite part about this whole thing. This is one of the reasons why I'm so okay with talking trash, just period, regardless of it being Colorado or if it's Oregon or if it's Miami or if it's Texas. Like, I'm okay with talking trash because the beautiful part about college football is you eventually have to play the game. You got to play the game. And the consequence of talking trash and then getting beaten, or the consequences of winning, is you get to then live with what you said, and that's how you go forward from there. You either become a social media punchline, or you look like a boss because you called your shot and then you went out and handled business. So at the end of the day here, it is what it is, and Deion's going to be Deion in that field in 2024 that they play on every single Saturday. That's going to tell us the truth about Colorado, and at the very least, give us some more answers. So I would really appreciate if we could use some nuance when we discuss Colorado and when we discuss Deion. But again, man, social media. So that's kind of one of those areas where there is a lot of opposition to nuance and to context and to all those things. I just think the right answer is probably somewhere in the middle when we talk about Deion Sanders. Now let's keep a good thing going now. The college football playoff is expanding to 12 teams in 2024. And I have been very vocal on this show. We were all the way against this 12-team playoff from the minute we even heard rumblings of this may be happening. One of the reasons we were against it is because I felt like in a 12-team format, you can more or less pencil in some teams that are going to be in the college football playoff before you even start the season. Now notice, I said pencil in. I did not say Sharpie or put in permanent ink that they are going to be in the playoff. But I think you look at some of the odds from FanDuel on these teams' chances to make the college football playoff, and they happen to feel a similar way to me. So with that being said, I want us to unpack some of the pencil-in college football playoff teams that we can address here as we sit in May. I think for full transparency, you can probably put right around 25% of the bracket together right now. So 3 college football teams I think are playoff, not locks, but soft locks as we sit here during the springtime. The first of those teams is Georgia. And FanDuel has Georgia's odds to make the college football playoff at minus 500. All right, so FanDuel feels pretty good about Georgia making the playoff. We do too. The big reason why, I do not see any glaring weaknesses with this team. I think if they were going to miss the college football playoff, they would somehow have to lose 4 games. I really think a 9-3 Georgia team with the schedule that they have would find their way into the playoff. And I think that the games that are most questionable are the games at Alabama, at Texas, and at Ole Miss. Those 3 games I'm most curious about when it comes to talking about Georgia. But here's the question. Are they really going to go 0-3 in that stretch? And if they do they lose another game? Because I think they could go 0-3, play all 3 of those teams tight, and still get into the dance. The way that they're built right now, I think, is as dangerous as any team in college football. They are more dynamic than they've ever been offensively, in my opinion. Carson Beck, I think, has a real chance to be QB1 this time next year when it comes to the NFL draft. And they have gotten some weapons for him to make that offense real deal dynamic. Like, you add Colby Young, you like what you saw from him during the spring and what you heard from him during the spring. You have Trevor Etienne in that backfield, who's going to add some more depth and I think be the lead rusher for you this season in Athens. And the experience that Carson Beck has as well shouldn't be overlooked. He gets his second year in the system with the same offensive coordinator in a system last year where, let's just be real here, he was real efficient when it came to his execution in 2024. 70% of his, or in 2023, 70% of his passes he completed. So he gets a chance to build off that and have even more continuity from that. I think that's dangerous. Kirby Smart even said as much. He feels like they maybe didn't cut him loose early enough at Georgia last year and didn't allow him to really have full control of the offense and full run of the offense, and I think that's going to change this year. The other part about this, I mentioned those 3 games that I'm circling for Georgia in terms of games that could maybe be the biggest test for them. If Georgia does drop one of those games, the way that Kirby Smart has wired his football team, whenever Georgia loses, it is not a depressant. It like wakes them up. When Georgia loses a football game, we've seen this over the course of the last couple of seasons, it's like an ice bath. Like some folks, they lose a game and they get down to the dumps and they start questioning themselves and it hurts the locker room and it just sort of causes the whole thing to fall apart. For Georgia, I think it's the opposite. I think it's a wake-up call. It's like an ice bath. Get some cold water dumped on you. Everything kind of wakes up a little bit. Okay, hey, we got to fix this. We got to come to our senses a little bit here. That's what I think would allow Georgia to really be scary in 2024 in this 12-team playoff. Giving them more margin for error is not a good deal. Giving Kirby Smart and that football team couple of mulligans, not the way that you want to approach things in 2024. Ohio State, what I saw, they have the best odds to make the college football playoff in 2024. FanDuel has them at minus 650. Minus 650. That is ridiculous. The reason why I like Ohio State so much and why I have them as a pencil-in playoff team, as does FanDuel based on those odds, their combination of ingredients on the roster plus their path to a playoff. In the Big Ten, I think a 2-loss team probably finds their way in. So, again, Ohio State, I'm not calling my shot for them to win the Big Ten, but they upgrade at quarterback, and situationally, they will be a better team offensively. And some of that, obviously, you could tip your hat to Chip Kelly in the way that he's going to call the offense, but I just mean in general. When Ohio State is in 3rd and 4 this upcoming season, you will feel very different as an Ohio State fan than you did last year. Because last year you got Kyle McCord playing quarterback. Depending on who was healthy in that running back room, you felt okay about your chances to run the football. But your thought process more than likely was, okay, how do we get the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr.? And can Kyle McCord make the right decision and be efficient enough to allow us to pick up this 3rd and 4, right? You didn't feel bad, but you had some of those questions. You had some of those feelings as to where the football needs to go. Now, this upcoming season on 3rd and 4, you're talking about, is it a 2-back set where you got Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins in the game? Is it a situation where you could see Will Howard on a run-pass option? Maybe you see him tucking and run on the read option? Is it a situation where the ball is going out to Emeka Egbuka? Is it to Jeremiah Smith? And I'm not saying they didn't have options last year offensively, but I think this upcoming season, situationally, Ohio State has so many other ways they can beat you to where I think that's a game changer. I keep hearing that Will Howard is like a 2.0 of Kyle McCord, and I'm not dunking on Kyle McCord. I just don't see it with Will Howard. He has more experience. He's a better athlete. I'm really excited to see how he looks in this offense. I think it's going to be a very, very good setup. Also, speaking of ingredients on that roster, they have the #1 defense in America. Period. I don't feel bad saying that at all. I think with Caleb Downs adding into that system, with all the guys they have coming back from last year's team that allowed single-digit points per game, they're going to be a force. They have another year in Jim Knowles' defense to get comfortable in that scheme. They're going to be a problem. So that's the roster ingredients. I think it is as good as anyone else in the country. I believe that's why Joel Klatt had them as his #1 team in the country post-spring. But the path for them, to me, is where it gets really interesting. To me, I think it's a 3-game season. Not to say that they couldn't slip up somewhere else, but there's 3 games that you circle as an Ohio State fan when you get a hold of that schedule. It is the game at Oregon, it's the game at Penn State, and then it's Michigan and Columbus. I don't see a world where Ohio State goes 0-3 in that stretch. I think 1-2 in that stretch would get you in, and I'd be surprised if Ohio State were to go 1-2 in that stretch. So the combination of ingredients, the path they have in front of them, I like Ohio State a lot to be a pencil-in playoff team. Now, Oregon is a team that I also think is a pencil-in playoff team for a similar reason to Ohio State. They don't have as good of odds as Georgia or Ohio State. FanDuel has them at minus 210. So you still have to bet a little bit of money to make some money against the suits there if you want to put Oregon in as a playoff team. But I don't think that the offense with them, with Dillon Gabriel, is going to miss a beat. And I think the defense has a chance to be even better than they were last year. Let's start with the offense. Dillon Gabriel, the fit offensively for them is perfect. It is. Like we said it even when he jumped in the portal. He is a left-handed version of Bo Nix. Physically a little bit different, but the same skill set nonetheless. He can run it for you. He can throw it on time and to the right place for you. And that's the big part of this. Like his skill set, I think, is rooted in the way that he knows where to go with the football. Like he has all the ability to be a distributor and to kind of be that point guard for you. But really what I love about him is the fact that he's played a lot of college football. Like my guy's going on year 6. You know how much experience you have after playing 6 years of college football? There's not a lot you haven't seen. And I'm not saying that Autzen won't be a different experience for him in playing in the Big Ten. There won't be some new things that he sees in that regard from a scheme or from an environment. But like for the most part, Dillon Gabriel is going to be one of the cooler hands in the stadium. And when you're able to have a cool hand and a calm mind, you think clearly. When you think clearly in this offense, you throw to the right person, you get to the right person in this offense, all their weapons they have, you're going to score a lot of points. So that's the big piece offensively. And then defensively, as I said, they bring back a lot. We talked about them landing Derek Harmon and the defensive line they have. Got Jabbar Muhammad through the portal, the corner from Washington. They bring back 70% of the production from last year's squad that allowed 17 points a game. So the continuity from last year plus the talented pieces, I love the way they're built. Now, the path is also a major part of this for Oregon. They have 2 major tests. You have Ohio State in Autzen, and then you're at Michigan. I think they could go 0-2 and still find their way in. I really do. I mean, the number 12 team last year in the college football playoff was Oklahoma from the Big 12, and they had 2 losses. And I don't think their losses were as good as Oregon. I mean, if Oregon loses to Michigan and Ohio State as we sit here in May, to me, those are better losses than the game against Kansas if you're Oklahoma. And that's not throwing shade at Oklahoma. Like, that's just to be real here. That's the way that I would look at that thing if I were an Oregon fan or from the College Football Playoff Committee. So 2 losses. If they lose both of those games, I think they still find their way in. Still some tricky ones on the schedule. You got to go to Wisconsin. There's Michigan State for Oregon. But even so, like I really have a hard time seeing a way where Oregon misses the College Football Playoff with their roster and that schedule. So those are the 3 teams I would pencil in. Now, I think there's probably some merit for like the next closest team you could talk about. I think Ole Miss is interesting there. If I were to put one more team in here, you say, JD, we need 4 teams. Give us one more team. I think Texas is fascinating. The reason why I don't have Texas as a pencil-in team is because there's still so many games for them that I'm just not sure what to make of their opponent. And there's a lot of new pieces for Texas to where I'm not sure what to make of the production they're going to have to replace with Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell accounting for almost 2,000 yards receiving last year. They got some good pieces, but what is Michigan going to be? We don't even know who Alex Orji is going to be if he ends up being the starting quarterback. We don't know what all that new production of Michigan is going to be. They got to play them week 2 in the Big House. Oklahoma, it's Red River. Like, we think that Texas is going to be the superior roster. We thought Texas was the better roster last year. Kind of the way that it works. They got to play Georgia. That'll be tough. Kentucky with Brock Vandagriff. Who knows what Kentucky's going to be? They're at A&M. That's going to be an absolutely insane rivalry environment at Kyle Field to finish the season. So there's so many games here to where I'm still a little bit hesitant to see exactly what Texas is. But if I had to pick a team, it's like, hey, give us 4 teams, your best estimation to make the college football playoff. I think Texas would also be in that group. So my pencil-in teams, and FanDuel supports this based on the odds they give us. We like Georgia. We like Ohio State. And then based on the roster and the path, I feel pretty good saying Oregon's going to be a college football playoff team as we sit here in May. So we're anti-12-team playoff, but we're here nonetheless, so we're going to embrace it. And part of us embracing it is doing a segment on teams that we think are going to be in that dance. So roll, party, roll. Now, you know a team that would love to be in the dance? And I think the folks in Lincoln would love to see them in the dance is Nebraska. And I put out a call to action on my Twitter page last night, at JD Pickell. Make sure you're following me there. Also, make sure you're subscribed right here to this YouTube channel because we talk college football, nothing but college football every single day. I said, what is a take that is your hill that you would die on in terms of the college football preseason? So kind of call your shot is what we asked y'all to do. And Joe did that in full force. He said Nebraska will be 7-0 going into Ohio State. First you hear that, you're like 7-0. We're talking about Nebraska, the team that has won less than 6 games each of the last 2 seasons. I mean, I haven't made a bowl game since, Vietnam, it feels like. That Nebraska. And then you take a closer look at their schedule, not quite as crazy as you might think. The first 7 for Nebraska, they got UTEP, they got Colorado, they got Northern Iowa, all at home. You got Illinois at home. You're at Purdue, you play Rutgers, and then you have a bye, and then you play Indiana, is I believe how it works out. So looking at that schedule, I don't see a team right off the bat that's like, yep, pencil that one in as a loss. Now, we'll call our shot a little bit closer to the season when it comes to the actual record around Nebraska. But the games that jump out to me as some potential swing games, Illinois and Purdue, you beat both those teams last year. This is a team that turned the ball over, I think, as much as anybody else in the country last year. Nowhere near what Matt Rule expects them to be long term. Colorado, I understand that was a tough game for you a season ago, but you get them at home. You turned the ball over 4 times last year in that game. Can't do that, but if they do that again in 2024, I'd be wildly surprised. Secondary has to be much better in that game if you want to beat Colorado. The point being, I think that's a winnable ball game. We'll predict it when it gets closer, but I think it's winnable. If you don't beat UTEP and Northern Iowa, we have other things to talk about. Rutgers and Indiana, if you're 5-0 going into those games, 6-0 I guess if you're talking about Indiana, I think the momentum would be a massive factor in helping you win that one. All these games are winnable. So Joe's calling his shot here. 7-0 I don't think is too wild of a take. Now, it would be refreshing in a lot of ways for the folks in Lincoln, but how do you get there? You get there by keeping the main thing. Same as accomplishing any other task. And I think when it comes to Nebraska winning football games in 2024, it comes down to, can you support Dylan Raiola? And when you do, can he make you right? Because Nebraska last season, the defense and the run game were the bread and butter. And quarterback was a revolving door, and quarterback was giving the football to the other team. It felt like every other play. 6% of their passes last year, I believe, ended in interceptions. One of the worst interception rates in the country. It's going to be a ping pong approach. Can you be able to do enough things well without making mistakes and wait for the other team to make a mistake and then capitalize? Like defense allowed 18 points a game, 78% of the production is back from last year, has to be stable. The run game last year, they ran for, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 175 yards a game. I don't know that you need 175, but you can get 150 a game. Boom, we'll take that. We'll run with it. Dylan Raiola, I do not see a world where he's not your starting quarterback game one. So let's just move forward with that sort of qualifier on Nebraska. He just has to be able to run the show. Doesn't have to be the star. Doesn't have to be Leo DiCaprio being the number one actor in the movie, but he needs to be able to make good decisions, go to the right place with the football, and that defense should allow them to be in every single game they play in. So if they play mistake-free football and capitalize on the other team's mistakes, it's going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be very, very fascinating to see what they end up being in 2024. So here's the thing now. If this happens, just put yourself in the situation. If this happens, we're heading into, I think it's week 9 of the college football season, technically, October 26th, and we got Nebraska, and we got Ohio State. Let's just say they're both undefeated. Can you imagine the emotion and the juice at Nebraska? Can you imagine just the overall excitement at Nebraska? Because this is a fan base that's been starving, man. Like we've talked about a lot on this show. They are starving for relevance and for something that they can be excited about when it comes to that football field. Now, Matt Rule brought a lot of that when he ended up being the head coach there, but they're still waiting on something substantial to wrap their arms around. And if they go 7-0, obviously you've already qualified for a bowl game. So, boom, check that off the list. That's a big dub. I think at that point, too, you've already, I think, surpassed the over-under win total for you in Vegas. I'll have to double-check that. I think it's 6.5. It might be 7.5 here in Nebraska. So you're very close to surpassing if you haven't already surpassed that win total. And the biggest part of this to me, if you're a Nebraska fan, this would just feel like validation. It'd feel like all those years where you went and talked to your buddies around the one-score losses you had and how close you were, and if this thing broke that way, and if you made this kick and then it turned the ball over against Minnesota, and if this happened and that happened, all those alternate realities you talked yourself into over the course of the last 2 to 3 seasons, and if it actually goes the way that it could go and you go 7-0, the validation of like, okay, I'm not crazy. Okay, we really were that close all those years. The foundation really was good for that long. Now, if you play Ohio State at Ohio State and how talented they are, we'll see what that game looks like. But going 7-0 into that game in itself, I think, would be a massive victory. Also, look at the rest of their schedule for Nebraska. How good, how many wins do they have to finish the season? Where's Nebraska sitting at the end of this thing? So Joe calling his shot. Joe, we appreciate you for it. Nebraska going 7-0 before they get to Ohio State. At first glance, it might sound a little bit crazy. When you unpack it, though, with some more depth, I think there's some legs to it. Again, we'll give you our prediction on Nebraska and their game-by-game season win total as we get closer and closer to the actual games being played. 7-0 is not a wild take from our friend Joe. So we appreciate you adding to the conversation and appreciate y'all being dialed in. Again, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. You know the drill. Just those are the best ways for us to stay involved together and to interact on this live show and content around this live show. So we appreciate y'all so much for that. Now, this was sort of in tandem with a college football take that you would die on the hill with. And this was from Bijan Robinson. One of y'all actually got at me. I think it was Doc Texas on Twitter that sent me this. But Bijan Robinson, I believe when he was interviewed at Texas' spring game, ended up saying whoever wins in the game October 19th, when Georgia comes to Texas and the Longhorns play the Bulldogs, he says the winner of that game will be the best team in college football. Now, do we agree with that? I don't know, but I think there's definitely going to be a lot to learn. And there's something to be said for the schedule both those teams play before they even get to that game. Because as good as that game's going to be, and as good as I think Texas and Georgia are going to be, I think that there's a couple of prerequisites for us to get Georgia and Texas as an undefeated matchup. Georgia plays Clemson to start the year in Atlanta, and they go to Alabama to end September. I know everyone is just totally writing off Clemson. I know a lot of people think Alabama's going to take a second to calibrate, outside of Tuscaloosa at least. I wouldn't pencil either of those in as wins right off the bat. Now, do I think Georgia will be favored in both those games? Absolutely, but I wouldn't just say, oh yeah, easy win. I think those are going to have to be wins that they work for and fight hard for. I think the folks in Athens feel the exact same way. For Texas, they play at Michigan week 2. The defending national champions. I know a lot of those individuals on that sideline are going to be new, but still, we can't just mail that in to be an easy dub. And then they play Oklahoma in Red River the week before. They do not get a bye after playing Oklahoma and then playing Georgia. So at the very least, you're going to kind of have to hit the recharge button really quick if you're Texas, hit the reset button on the emotional capacity, because that's a game against Oklahoma that we've seen many times. The winner or the loser of that game, for that matter, it takes some recuperation to be able to play your best football after that one. You can't have a letdown. You can't be too beat up. Like, it takes something for you to play well after that one. So if both are undefeated, I think the winner obviously has a couple of things that they could attain. Clearly, inside track to Atlanta for an SEC championship bid. When it comes time for those rankings to come out, feel pretty confident in saying the winner of this game will be number 1 in America. And also, this is a major eye test implications kind of game if both are undefeated. The winner will have the best resume in America. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, there's probably some people in Columbus, Ohio, and Eugene, Oregon that feel like they should have a chance at this title. But Ohio State and Oregon, they play the week before this. Outside of that, I don't think either team has a game on the schedule that you circle right now and say, hey, that's the one. It'll be a top 10, top 15 matchup. We just talked about Nebraska for Ohio State, so we'll see where they sit when that game arrives. But for Ohio State and Oregon, that'll be a big game. They played the week before, but I think for all that Georgia and Texas have to do to get to this spot, if they're both undefeated, that resume is going to be pretty tough to argue with. Now, here's the other thing with this. In an expanded college football playoff, I think the winner of Georgia and Texas, if both are undefeated, more than likely locks up a pretty high confidence level for making that college football playoff. Now, obviously, you can't just coast the rest of the way, but let's look at what they have remaining. I think if either team were to lose 3 games, it's maybe another conversation, but I don't see a way where either team is going 2-3 with this schedule. Texas, their last 5 are at Vandy, Florida, at Arkansas, Kentucky, and then at A&M. If they're undefeated coming out of that game against Georgia, I don't see a way where they lose 3 of those games. Same thing with Georgia. They play Florida in Jacksonville. They're at Ole Miss. They play Tennessee, UMass, and Georgia Tech. Not saying that they couldn't lose one of those games, but to lose 3 of those games, that to me would be a little bit surprising. So the winner of this one, I think, should more than likely lock up a pretty good feeling around your college football playoff chances. Now, this is another thing we got to talk about with this. Both these teams are phenomenal. This matchup will be phenomenal. This is one of the many pros of the conference realignment to tectonic plates that are shifting. We've kind of been against this new era of college football with, the college football that we grew up with, knowing and loving, and the Pac-12 and all those things and what the Big 12 used to be. But, when Georgia plays Texas in Austin, that's going to be phenomenal. And to be honest, it may not be the last time we see this matchup during this season. There's a very real possibility we see this game played 3 times in 2024. From the regular season to the SEC title game, because remember now, no more division in the SEC. And then when it comes to the college football playoff, I wouldn't be surprised if these teams got matched up somehow, some way too. Could be a national championship game. That's how crazy college football is right now with all these different schedules. I think this game, subconsciously, for a lot of us, will be a measuring stick. Whether you think they are the best team in the country if they win, or whether you think that they have some things they got to work on coming out of it, it'll be a measuring stick. Texas is going to be one of the top teams in the country coming into this game, whether they're undefeated or not. Same thing with Georgia. Strictly based on the roster, both these teams have what it takes, I believe, to win or at least compete for a national championship. Now, what does that look like in practice and in principle? This game is going to tell us a lot about that. A word of caution, though, for this game in itself. I just spoke about how they could play 3 times. I'd be very careful to define either team based on this game in a positive or in a negative sense. I wouldn't make absolute statements about either team from this game. You can take a measuring stick and figure out where they stand to a degree and kind of assess them, but I'll just say this, great teams in college football, we see it all the time. They play their best football when their best football is required in the postseason. So just because these teams might look a certain way in October, I would not be surprised if they look very different when they play in December or they play somewhere else in December or someone else in December. I would just be cautious to make a definitive statement about either team and their chances for a national championship based on this game they play October 19th in Austin. So is Bijan Robinson on to something there? I think so. I think the former Texas running back, now Atlanta Falcons running back, has some validity to that statement. I'm not going to pretend there's not some bias baked in there too for our guy Bijan, and that's why we love him for it. But still, there's a lot of other variables at play, but at the very least, this will be a very good measuring stick and have some implications like college football playoff race and the SEC title race. It is just wild to me. It is just wild to me now that we are going to talk about Texas and Georgia, or Texas and Oklahoma, or Texas and Bama, or Texas and insert whatever SEC team you want there as a conference game. That is wild. That is absolutely wild, man. Hey, everyone in the live chat, we appreciate y'all being dialed in. Big shouts to y'all making time for being dialed in during your workday, during whatever you got going on right now. Thanks for making us part of your day. Would ask you to do 2 things. 1, like the video. And then if you're on podcast, no worries. Make sure you subscribe to the feed. So that's something you can do if you're on YouTube or you're on podcast. Subscribe to the feed. We appreciate you so much for it. We're going to get to your questions here via the live chat in just a few moments. Now, the last take I want to get to for a college football take that you would die on the hill for when it comes to the college football preseason for 2024 comes from one of the best usernames I think we've gotten in a long time, from Jalen Milroe's burner. They just say, Millie for Heisman. And obviously, Jalen Milroe's burner is referring to Jalen Milroe winning the Heisman Trophy in 2024. Now, it's fitting that this is a question we're talking about right now, or a take we're talking about right now, because the On3 main Twitter account just put out a graphic for the Heisman Trophy odds according to FanDuel heading into 2024. Now, Jalen Milroe was given the 4th best odds at plus 1,400. So if you think this is going to happen, you put some money down, you make a lot of it if he does win the Heisman Trophy. I'll be transparent. I love this. I love this take. And if you've watched this show for any length of time, you know I haven't always felt this way about Jalen Milroe. The turnover issues a year ago, 2 years ago, I guess at this point now, made me a little bit concerned. His consistency throwing the football in the intermediate game made me a little bit concerned. But when he gets plugged into that Kalen DeBoer offense and they have the whole scheme installed around him and everything is built to his skill set, he is going to cook. Like, I'm glad we got this take because I was trying to figure out a segment to make this point anyway. Jalen Milroe is going to do crazy numbers in 2024. I promise you. Because the way that this thing is going to work, I didn't see it at first, but I see it now. They're going to play to his skill set. And the way that it looked at first when Kalen DeBoer got hired is like, hey, Michael Penix Jr. and Jake Haener, quarterbacks that have had success under Kalen DeBoer and playing in Kalen DeBoer's scheme, they're throwing quarterbacks. They throw the football first. Kalen DeBoer has thrown the ball over the last 4 years right around 40 times a game on average. Jalen Milroe in Alabama last year threw the ball right around 23 times a game. So how is this going to fit in a pass-happy, air quotes there for those of y'all on podcast, how is it going to fit in a pass-happy offense? Kalen DeBoer hasn't gotten where he is by not playing to his personnel. Does he have a certain direction he wants to go with it? Sure, but if we think that Kalen DeBoer is just going to excuse Jalen Milroe's legs and say, that's nice you have that, use it when you can, we're kidding ourselves. We're absolutely kidding ourselves if we think that's going to be the reality. And we sat down with Kalen DeBoer in Tuscaloosa, looked him face to face, microphone in our hand, microphone in his hand, and asked him, how are you going to utilize Jalen Milroe's legs? He didn't get specific, obviously, but he told us enough to make us feel like, hey, we're going to make sure that we utilize the best athletes on the field's abilities. That's going to be a reality. That's something they do, and it's going to be nasty. The reason why I think it's going to be nasty is because I think they're going to play to his strengths as a runner while giving him more help than he's ever had before as a passer. What I mean by that is when you break down Kalen DeBoer's offense from a broad strokes perspective, they do a lot of things pre-snap with motions and shifts to kind of get the defense off balance. In addition to that, they use spacing really, really effectively. Not the same as Josh Heupel or Jeff Lebby, but kind of in a similar thought process as we're going to make you cover the entire width of the field. And so all these things pre-snap and spacing are going to play to Jalen Milroe's skill set and allow him to have just easy access throws. I'm not saying they're going to be easy throws all the time, but I mean, we're not going to ask Jalen Milroe to be Tom Brady here, okay? We're not asking him to fit it in a window or be able to read the defense like Peyton Manning. Like, of course, it's going to require some processing from him, which he is more than capable of doing, but it's not going to be like an AP-level offense to that degree. It's going to be, here's the system we have in place. We're going to set you up for success in the matchups we create and the spacing we create. Make the right throw, go to the right place with the football. So that's the first. Also, we got to mention this too. There's now helmet communication. I don't know exactly who's going to be on the headset, but I think that has to help Jalen Milroe as he gets his feet underneath him in this new offense. But the spacing is what I want to go back to when we talk about his legs. Because whenever you space out the offense, what it does to a defense is it makes the defense thin. What I mean by thin is I mean typically there is usually not more than one guy per an assignment. So if that one individual doesn't accomplish their assignment correctly defensively, what does it leave behind them? Whole lot of green grass. And so if Jalen Milroe is able to, whether on design quarterback runs or on ad-lib quarterback runs, be able to make one man miss or one man's out of position or one man is covering a receiver and Jalen Milroe tucks it and runs, he doesn't see it, it's going to be a lot like that LSU game we saw where Jalen Milroe puts up video game numbers and we're talking about him in the Heisman Trophy conversation. So when we talk about the Heisman Trophy now, let's not dismiss the fact that I think that conversation changes drastically as well. Because when we look at Jalen Milroe and the way that this offense is going to operate, he's going to put up points, he's going to put up numbers, but people talk about this a lot with the Heisman Trophy. It's a team award. You hear that a lot. It's a team award. Well, right now in college football, the field for the college football playoff is widening. And so the way that we view Jayden Daniels last year, what was the thing you were hearing a lot of for why he shouldn't win the Heisman Trophy? Well, his team's 9-3. Well, his team has multiple losses. Well, they're not in the national title hunt. That's what you heard last year. I think this year the conversation would change to Jayden Daniels is carrying his team on his back to the doorstep of a national college football playoff berth. That would be the conversation you would have this year. So as we widen the field for the college football playoff and for these teams, I think we also subconsciously are going to widen the playoff or widen the field rather for Heisman Trophy finalists. And I'm not saying Alabama's going to win the national championship. I'm not saying they're not going to win the national championship. But I think when you talk about what will be required from an individual perspective to win the Heisman Trophy, it's not going to be, I don't think, quite as exclusive as maybe it was previously. And I honestly think that's going to bode well for the Heisman Trophy race this year. I think it'll be a lot wider than it's been in the past. I think it'll be a lot more players that deserve to be in that conversation that weren't on college football playoff teams or were on multiple loss teams that are going to get a lot more shine this year and a lot more consideration because more teams will be in the race. So bottom line, Jalen Milroe is going to be a dog. I can't wait to watch him in 2024. I think he's going to do crazy numbers. I think the offense, as much as it seems like it may not be a perfect fit, I think they're going to play to his skill set, and it'll be a very, very beautiful picture. And I can't wait to see it. So good take there by Jalen Milroe's burner, saying Millie for Heisman. Look at that B-roll there. A lot of B-roll from our guy Trey Yannity making it happen there from the SEC title game. Hoping to get more of that for y'all this upcoming season. All right, best part of the show now, baby. We involve y'all into the show, and that is why we call ourselves the People's College Football Show, among other reasons. And to break down y'all's questions, thoughts, concerns, and to read them off from the live chat, the man making it all happen, Nick Brake. Nick, what's up, baby? How we living?
Dude, I had a little bit of a false start. I was on camera for about 3 seconds.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You look good?
I looked great.
You look camera ready.
Yeah. So
just pop it in, saying what's up to the people, man.
Yeah. So what's going on, guys? JD, there was a question for you a while ago. I'm going to have to scroll, though, because, man, oh, man, there have been a lot of chats today.
That's good, though. People got something to say, man.
Yeah.
People got something to say.
This question's from The Truth, who asks a lot of good questions, but I can't seem to find it. So, JD, do you have anything you want to plug before I do?
No, I would just say let's make sure we're locked into the podcast. That's one thing that we've kind of been pushing for over the course of the last, I guess, few shows. If you listen via podcast, we're glad to have y'all here. But if you haven't yet discovered us on podcasts, here's your chance now to go ahead and subscribe to that feed and to leave us a review there. It all helps. It all helps move the entire mission forward, I guess, is the point there. I see someone say Red River is always a toss-up. It really is. That's one of the reasons why I didn't have Texas as a pencil-in playoff team. I think they're going to be really, really good. And I think if you had to ask me for one more team, I'd put Texas in that mix. But when we talk about Texas and Oklahoma, man, like Texas should be favored. Texas had the better roster. It was that way this past season, and obviously that game went how it went. So curious to see what that looks like long-term, but should be a fun one nonetheless. Those rivalry games. And they also have A&M to end the year at A&M. So the rivalry games will throw another variable of mystery into this whole deal. What's up, Nick? We got anything else in there, brother? We get any luck finding the truth's question?
Yeah, I found it like as soon as I stopped
nice.
talking.
Nice.
JD, he says, let's say you're a coach at a school. What position coach would you like, or like which specific position would you want to hire immediately?
That's a good question. I think quarterback coach makes the most sense. Most important position on the field, probably also has a pretty good influence on the offense. Like you got to have those two synced up. I think we see a lot of times the success with a quarterback and an offensive coordinator kind of being the same a quarterback coach and an offensive coordinator being the same person because you are the most in tune with the most important position on the field. So I'd probably go ahead and hire a quarterback coach and kind of build out from there.
Okay, good question. Strike Above says, like the DC United jacket. Thank you. That's my team.
There you go.
Jared Sidham says, will this season have the best rivalry week? A lot of playoff spots will be open still, and a lot of spoilers can be made.
That's a really good question. I see both sides. I think on one hand, last couple of seasons, I mean, and in the playoff era, the rivalry weekend has been a situation where Ohio State and Michigan, more or less for a playoff spot. And you kind of go down the line and you're like, well, how many other rivalry games were for a playoff spot? I think in that regard, we will see more games themselves for those 9 and 10 spots, 11 and 12 spots. So that in itself, I think, is going to be fascinating. Conference championship weekend will also be a playoff implications kind of weekend. But yeah, without a doubt, there's going to be, I think, a lot more buzz around more games in the college football sector, or in the college football rivalry weekend sector, rather.
Okay, King Epic, what do you think will have the single greatest impact on the 2024 season, whether it's a coaching change, rule change, a player transfer, or a recruitment, or anything like that?
Man, it's hard for me to go against some of the portal moves that we've made. Like Miami landing Cam Ward, to me, made them a playoff contender. I think they're going to be a playoff team if we had to pick today. But it's also hard to not say that Nick Saban and his ripple effect of retiring and Jim Harbaugh moving, like the coaching changes you could also point to, I'll say the transfer portal will have the highest impact just because of what I said a second ago. There's a couple of teams now that got some missing pieces to where they're maybe a player or two away. They got that player or two that's going to make them a playoff team in 2024. So we're not calling our shot just yet. We'll give you our college football playoff rankings post-spring probably next week. We got portal winners for you tomorrow, but that's how I feel about it right now. It's hard to undersell the ripple effect of Nick Saban, but just for 2024, I'll go ahead and say the portal and those moves they've made for some of the big dogs in the sport.
I'm going to say conference realignment and the playoff expansion.
Yeah, that's a massive one, dude. That is an absolutely massive one.
That's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, hey, it's there for a reason, though. It's meant to be eaten, you know?
That's true. OG Gary says, and this will be our last question,
which
teams do you think will be the biggest letdown of the season?
Ooh, biggest letdown of the season. It's easy for me to just look at the teams that have so many unknowns. Like, you look at Michigan, they're coming off a national championship, but, like, is anyone expecting them to go back-to-back this season outside of Ann Arbor? I guess you could say there's potential for letdown there. Alabama, the same thing. I think Jalen Milroe is going to be awesome, but the standard is just so impossibly high there to where you lose 3 games. It's like, what are we doing? Kalen DeBoer, can he coach football? It's like the standards are so high at both those places. I wonder how that's going to shake out when it comes to what they accomplish in 2024 relative to those high expectations. So I think those are the easy ones to point to for teams that could be let down. But you know who I think could be let down is some of those teams in the SEC that are getting bumped back in the pecking order by Texas and Oklahoma joining. I think there's a lot of teams that like are licking their chops at OU and Texas joining, and they're like, oh, yeah, you'll come learn about the SEC this year. And then you play Oklahoma, and you get beat by them, and you're like, dang, okay, so where are we now in the SEC? That in itself could kind of be a letdown of sorts. But regardless, a lot of talking points we move into this season. Like, there's so much transition from the conference realignment to the portal to the coaching carousel to where we're really, I think more than ever before, trying to get a gauge for the way that these conference races are going to shake out. I mean, I gave you my pencil in playoff teams. It wouldn't surprise me if Georgia didn't win the SEC. Oh, I shouldn't say that. I think Georgia will win the SEC if we had to pick today. But the bottom line here is Oregon could make the playoff not being a Big Ten champ and so on and so forth with Ohio State and Michigan and all that. So I'm talking in circles here, but there's a lot that's left to be discussed and a lot that's changed. So it'll be fun.
Okay.
Good stuff. Well, Nick, appreciate you, brother. Same time tomorrow?
Yeah, let's do it.
Good stuff. Nick Brink. Looking sharp, too. Big kickball game tomorrow, so we'll talk about that and get his pregame mindset for you as we move here into kickball season, which, of course, corresponds very nicely with the college football season. College football season for us is year-round here, so we're very glad for y'all to treat it accordingly as well. We're glad that y'all consider college football a year-round sport and to tune into this show and to make it what it is, to make it the community it is. We are extremely, extremely thankful and do not take that for granted for a second. A little bit biased, but I think we have the best job on the face of the planet. So, we love y'all. We appreciate y'all. We're going to keep this party rolling, and we will see y'all next time.